51% attacks have always been an animating theme in blockchain security. Since the integrity guarantees come from distribution, how do they break when one player gets the majority of the hash rate? Well, that was the question facing the Monero community in August after an actor entered the game, rained hash power from the sky, and very publicly pulled off a 6-block reorg of the chain. But immediately after the announcement of a successful 51% attack hit the TL, another narrative emerged, claiming the numbers didn't add up. No one saw the hash rate pass 50% of the network. And you see, reorgs can happen at significantly less than 50%. In this episode, we cover selfish mining, the events around Monero in mid-August, and the unique approach to proof of work that let it all come together. Sometimes, all you need is a bit of luck. This is Not Your Crypto Podcast.
Hello, and welcome back to Not Your Crypto Podcast. This is episode 24 with myself, Justin, and...
Michael, is it really 24?
It is. It's 24.
Oh, okay.
We keep going. Technically, a year and a bit. I'm quite proud of us, man. We've kept this going. That's because the blockchain universe constantly keeps giving with its interesting stories and adventures. Am I lying?
Oh, very much so. What do we got today?
So today we've got Monero. We're going to talk about the Monero attack. I'm reticent to call it a hack, and for the reasons that should become clear as we go on through this podcast episode. But yeah, you know about it. I know about it. It kind of was a weird flash in the pan. It kind of almost like supernova-like in the way it was. It flared up, took over the conversation for 12 hours, 24 hours, and then it's been gone from, and we've never heard of them since, which is actually in keeping with my suspicions about what its aims were. So you're probably all wondering what we're talking about. So basically, we'll give you a brief outline. Monero is another layer 1 blockchain. A layer 1 blockchain we have covered before in this podcast. I think it was back in one of the early days, one of our early episodes, which was, I think, entitled Come One, Come All, where we, on our product tip, wanted to look at, we realized different chains had different strengths in different technical abilities. And so we wanted to look at what had been invented to meet certain objectives, technical objectives anyway. And Monero was one of them. And it puts privacy at the forefront. Michael will go into that in a bit later and how it does that. It's quite cool, some of the things it's come up with. But long story short, privacy at the forefront, which also makes it the arch enemy of many a law enforcement professional around the world. Yeah, so you thought I was going to say another chain, didn't you? Just called chain wars for no reason. But yeah, no. So basically, it is a very privacy-focused chain. It comes up with it uses some very novel cryptographic techniques, which we shan't bore you with now. In fact, you can go back to Come One, Come All and actually hear some of them, because I think we summarized.
Do we talk about them? Because I felt like I was learning them again when I was reading this episode.
Dude, 24 episodes deep, you're going to forget some of the things we've discussed. I've not forgot more than you'll ever learn type thing. So Monero was attacked effectively a few weeks ago now. I don't know the date. Do you have a date for this one,
August 12th was when most of the chatter about it was.
August 12th, 2025, in the middle of summer effectively, or late summer, I guess. Yeah, it was attacked by another network. I'm using that word lightly. I think it classes itself as a network. I think it classes itself as an L1 chain. Mm-hmm. It classes itself as a bunch of different things. Again, it's kind of hard to pin down. But basically, they tried to attack Monero using with a 51% attack. That was the specific attack they tried to use to try and compromise the Monero chain. What is a 51% attack? Michael, what's a 51% attack?
So, yeah, man, all these things you could start way, way, way back, I guess.
You can go
so blockchain works by, you have a series of blocks that get added sequentially one after another. Those blocks get added or mined based on a consensus mechanism. That consensus mechanism can work a few different ways. We'll probably get into more details on it, but probably the most familiar way, the original and most familiar way is what's called proof of work, right? Which is there's this hash that you're trying to work out by throwing kind of raw compute power at it. You're trying to solve this puzzle. Whoever finds the solution to the puzzle first is the one that gets to add the next block onto the chain. And all the network players, throw compute power at the consensus, at the consensus mechanism at the problem to try to solve it. And so one of the ways you can talk about that is who is throwing how much compute power at the network to get these next blocks, right? And how much percentage of the overall hash rate, it's one
Mm-hmm.
word, the overall like work rate in the network is owned by different entities. And one of the things that people talked about it much more like early on in blockchain's life, when the overall hash rate of things was much lower, kind of like pre ASIC mining really, and pre like all that. One of the threats is, well, blockchains are supposed to be decentralized. Like some of the security guarantees of a blockchain, one in particular that we'll talk about, exist because the network is decentralized and because subsequent blocks, are mined by different entities, right? Then the kind of obvious question to ask yourself is, well, what happens if one entity owns a majority, let's say, of the hashing power in the blockchain? And that would mean that entity, over time, probabilistically over time, that entity would be adding the majority of blocks,
Exactly. And
right?
so, and that's why we care about this, and that's why the whole world cares about this. And so, yeah, this is an attack that had been theorized basically since blockchain's inception, in terms of being able to capture most of the computing power and then have most of the actual authority, or then be making yourself the authority on chain, because you effectively then get to determine what transactions get written into a block and then what blocks get mined. And effectively, you then have read and you have write permissions over the chain yourself, and you can do things to the chain. You can effectively compromise the chain because it's no longer decentralized. It can write to the chain what you want, and you can change transactions, you can ignore transactions, you can orphan transactions, and so forth. So what people said was the defense against this is the larger the network becomes, the harder it becomes for some one actor or two bad actors to capture all of this computing
Yeah.
power. That was the theory. So it was always good. It was always a case of the bigger it gets, the more involved parties, the less centralized it becomes, the harder it becomes to actually do this. And so until this day, until August 12th, nobody had ever seen nobody had actually launched, to my knowledge, a successful 51% attack.
Yeah, I mean, maybe like probably at scale. I don't know. I assume there's probably smaller projects that
Mm-hmm.
did, maybe, but I don't know an
Yeah.
example.
None of them have
Um,
been publicized, not as publicized and as well publicized as this one was. And
yeah.
this is kind of why we care about this, because it's an actual interesting thing. It's like the defense mechanisms were designed into these chains from the start to stop this from happening. And somebody said, okay, well, we think those defense mechanisms can be surmounted, and
Yeah.
publicly announced that they were going to do this, did it, and then claimed success. And we say claim success in inverted commas because there is, as you will find out later on in this episode, there is some controversy around whether they actually did do what they said they did, which was launch a 51% attack, take control of most of the compute power, and then end up being able to control the chain for the period of time that they said they did.
Yeah. I think
Michael, you
it
sound
might
like
be
an interesting.
useful to like talk a little bit more specific about the kind of mechanism through which you can do bad things through a 51% attack, because I think
Yeah,
it
go ahead.
gets relevant. So
Mm-hmm.
like the reason why, if I own a majority of the network, I can do the things that I can do, which we can get specific, I guess, about kind of two specific things,
Mm-hmm.
is when the blockchain network, so like it's common, and it does happen that when the network's being mined, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like let's say Bitcoin or whatever is being mined, um, two miners might discover the next block at the same time,
Mm-hmm.
or very near the same time.
Yeah.
And so for like a short period of time, there may be multiple really blockchains out
Mm-hmm.
there on the network, right?
Multiple versions of the same blockchain is how I
Multiple
like to.
versions of the
Yeah.
same blockchain with blocks added by different miners.
Yeah.
And so you need a way that the network needs a way to converge on one of those,
Yeah.
right? So the typical way a network converges on selecting one of them is to use what's called the longest chain rule, which is, if I, as a client, see that there's multiple chains out there, I'm going to select the longer one, the one with more blocks in it, as the one that I take as the canonical chain. And so the idea is like miners may simultaneously discover a block. There may be a couple chains out there on the network at the same time due to latency and stuff like that. When one may come to certain clients sooner than the other. But as subsequent blocks get mined, one of them will be probabilistically, one of them will clearly will be faster and will get more blocks added to it. The other one will be slower and will get less blocks added to it, and the network will converge on one canonical chain. So it happens semi-frequently, that there are actually multiple chains out there with similar number of blocks, and the network kind of diverges and converges. And that's why you wait a certain number of blocks before you confirm a transaction, right? So there's different standards for different chains about how many blocks you wait, but you typically wait a few blocks, because what you don't want to happen is I took a transaction as being as having happened in a version of the blockchain that I saw, but then later my version of the blockchain gets dropped because a longer one showed up, and now my transaction's kind of gone. I need to I need to get it back in there or whatever. So that's going to be very relevant, because if we look at why owning 51% of the network leads to breaking some of the blockchain's properties, there's like two things in particular that are a concern when one actor owns more than 51%. One is the ability to censor transactions, and they both have to do with if I have 51% of the network, the reason why that's bad is basically I can always be publishing the longest chain. Like probabilistically, I'm going to be mining the majority of the blocks, and so I am always going to be publishing the longest chain, and that's the chain clients will take as canonical. So it gives me the ability to, one, censor transactions, because if I don't include a transaction in the blocks I'm mining, and I have the longest chain over time, then I can keep a transaction out of the chain. So it gives me some ability to censor transactions. The other thing it gives me is the ability to double spend. It's what's called double spending. I think double spending is a little bit of a misnomer for what happens under the hood. Is it okay if I go into this? I don't know.
Yeah, go on.
Okay.
Yeah, no, go on.
So double spending on the blockchain doesn't actually mean that I spend the same coins twice from the perspective of the blockchain. It means that okay, I'll go through the sequence. I discover a block at some time t0 as the miner. I withhold the discovery of that block, right? And I keep mining myself. And because I have a majority of the hash power, I'm going to be able to mine the longest chain. Later on, I reveal my longer chain because I've been mining it. So I withhold it and then I reveal it. And then the rest of the network adopts my longer chain, and the other chain that was going on drops off. So double spending means that while I was doing that, while I was withholding my chain, on that other version of the chain, I put in a transaction. Somebody else took that transaction as canonical. And then I, after that, reveal my longer chain. The chain that had my transaction on it drops off. So that transaction no longer happened, but I still got whatever it was I wanted from doing that transaction. Maybe somebody transferred me some other token or sold me some good or whatever, transferred me something valuable. And now on the longer version of the chain that I was withholding, that transaction isn't there. And so it's, from the perspective of the chain, it's like I hadn't spent.
It's like you haven't, because the transaction, at one point, the transaction was valid and it was cryptographically had its cryptographic integrity. It was added to the chain, and so it was fine as a block. That chain that version of that chain no longer exists because you've done. Now, this is where I'm going to drop two new words. Selfish mining, effectively, is what you've just described.
That process where I mine, but I withhold when I found a block, and then I start mining just myself, just in my network, a longer chain. You'll hear that called selfish mining.
That is selfish mining.
There's other names for it too, but that's, I think, probably the biggest main one.
Okay.
And then I reveal it later, and it's longer, and it gets accepted. Yeah.
And all these things are possible because of the fact that this bad actor has taken control of a large majority of the computing power. Let's not forget, a couple of years back, when everything was proof of work, one of the biggest issues was the amount of power it was taking could be used for more productive means. And so that's why a lot of people switched to proof of stake, amongst some other reasons. But one of the major reasons that was marketed for why these chains made this switch was because they wanted to become more energy efficient. But at the same time, computing power the way it was thought of back in the day was computing power was equivalent to resources dedicated to a thing, to this problem. And you wanted to make sure that those people who partook in the network and supported the network, they, A, spent some of their resources, which was computing power, and B, they were compensated for spending their resources in this computing power,
Mm-hmm.
which was why it's called mining, because you spend your computing power to solve these problems, and then you get given a token that represents whatever value in the real world, and therefore you get paid for doing it. And so these are the problems that you can have when you have a proof of work consensus mechanism, which is you can have selfish mining. The biggest actor on the block with the most computing power is the one who has the most say over the network. So what you try and do is
Yes.
you make it harder and harder for someone to amass that amount of power by decentralizing it. Um,
And I think like if we think back a little bit, like um some of the chains, like Bitcoin in particular, went through kind of a scare with this when it transitioned from um it being like, way back in the day, just like people mining it on their desktops or on their servers or like,
mhm.
university labs or whatever, to GPU based mining first, and then to like ASIC based mining, right? And one of the concerns, like at each of those steps, was the ability for a very well resource and capitalized party to get access to the capital, like to the physical plant of ASIC. I don't know these words, chips or
Yeah.
whatever.
Yeah, they're just ASIC chips.
And so that leading to centralization in the hash rates, right? Because there's like economies of scale, there's
Hmm.
whatever. And how does that affect the distributed nature of the network?
Yeah, exactly. So that, circling back, that's kind of the background to what happened here and why it was of significance when someone claimed that they were going to do this. Um, so what happened? So that's why we care. So then what happened was effectively you had this other network known as Cubic, which really was kind of fronted by a couple of guys on Twitter, quite honestly, who then decided that their platform during its downtime, so they have an AI-based platform that they use to train models on. But because of the way Monero works, it's kind of forked away from Bitcoin in a way, in that its consensus mechanism, or the mining mechanism, sorry, the mining algorithm that it uses, has been hardened against being able to be optimized for GPUs and ASIC chips. The actual algorithm only works well on CPU based chips.
Yeah, so like the community was worried about the network being taken over by being
Yeah,
able to be taken over by large like ASIC mining players, right? They're
yeah,
like,
and
oh,
for
if
privacy,
if one of the big like ASIC mining, shops, whatever, decides to point at Monero because it's a smaller chain, it could probably take it over if it's just like, the Bitcoin consensus mechanism or something like that. They didn't want that to
exactly.
happen. So they designed or selected, I forget if it was a pre-existing design or whatever, but they intentionally selected a consensus mechanism that was resistant to GPU and ASIC mining,
Yeah,
and that was optimized for general purpose CPU mining, which is
yeah.
extremely interesting. I don't know. I found that very, very
It
nerd
is
sniping is the word that
fascinating.
I learned
Yeah,
recently that I've
it's an
been using a
absolute
lot. But yeah,
fascinating decision. And I recommend anyone who's prone to nerd sniping, as Michael says, to go onto the Wikipedia page and do your own research in terms of how they did that and decisions they made and the cryptography involved there. So to perform an end run around the possibility of them being actual taken over and basically having people optimize their chips for this algorithm and therefore be able to take over most of the computing power of the network, they decided to go with this hardened algorithm. It relies on CPU. This other network, the bad actor that said they did that launched this 51% attack against Monero, has all these has all these general purpose CPUs lying around because they use them. They're basically training some AI models. Apparently, I don't know too much details about this, but when they have downtime on the CPU, they decide to start mining Monero. And that's where it gets interesting because at some point, we don't know when or why, they got the bright idea that they think that they would be able to attract more miners to their pool and therefore start to accumulate large amounts of hash rate. We're just going to use that phrase now, but basically computing power. When you hear hash rate, just substitute it in your mind for computing power. They did this through a very novel mechanism. So you got to think there's all these big brains sitting in a room designing how these chains work, thinking technically how could this be possible? Da, 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 da. But then in real life, what kind of the basic thing that this network did called Cubic, the bad act, the quote unquote bad actor, because obviously they did publicize this. And if anything, I would say this is kind of a grey hat exercise. But anyway, I'll let that one be an exercise up to the viewer to decide and determine, because they did publicly announce they were going to do this, and they did only do it for a certain amount of time. And they said when and where.
They announced like a window that they were going to attempt a
Yeah.
takeover in. Yeah.
Exactly. So Cubic, where am I? Yeah. So Cubic effectively were mining, and then they were like, okay, we want more miners to join our pool. How do we do this? Let's incentivize them by paying them, because that's what miners are in it for. They're trying to get paid. They have their own token. Now, this is where, Michael, you're going to have to keep me honest on this one, because this was a fascinating, this kind of pricked my ears up. Instead of trying to basically come up with some type of galaxy brain technical attack, they basically said, we're just going to pay you in one token, depress the price, pump up the price of our token that we pay you in, and depress the price of the token that you get paid in right now. That's kind of what they did. There's obviously more detail to it than that, but they have their own token called Cubic, and they basically had specific scheduled burns, token burns, where basically they're supposed to permanently delete tokens off their network forever, which obviously there's an inflationary pressure on their token. They did this by taking the mined Monero paying for the mined Monero from these miners, if I'm correct, Michael. You can tell me where I'm wrong. They paid the Monero miners in their own token that they were putting inflationary pressure on by burning, and then taking the Monero from those miners that they just exchanged for their Cubic and selling them on the open market, which starts to depress its price.
Yeah, so basically, like, their blockchain trains this AI model that uses, I think, a combination of GPU and CPU, whatever. I'm not exactly sure, but part of training it, they had idle CPU time, like you said. They use that idle CPU time to mine Monero. So, like, if I'm a member of this network and I'm, training this AI model on the Cubic chain, part of my CPU time is being used to mine Monero. When that Monero gets mined, instead of that Monero going to the miner, which would be the typical course, that Monero gets sold for like stablecoin for USDT, and then I think I have the details on this, right? But you can check it out. They have some articles about it, and then gets used to purchase their token, the Cubic token, and then it gets burnt. So basically, the mined Monero they're using to basically swap for the Cubic token and then burn it. So, token gets burned, that's decreasing supply of the token. That's a deflationary pressure on the supply of the token. Idea is price goes up when that happens. And that accrues value to the Cubic token, which is what I'm also mining as part of being part of this network. So that's I think that's the high level of what would they call it? The tokenomics. That's what the Web3 guys would call it, right?
Yeah.
The tokenomics of this system. That resulted in a higher value to the miner than just mining Monero raw for a bunch of reasons. They're also I assume, I don't know if they're have some VC backing that is also injecting money into the ecosystem, and they're doing stuff with that. But it significantly higher rewards to the miner for being part of mining Monero that way versus just mining it regularly. Which meant that a bunch of hash rate followed the money, right?
Yeah.
And I think there was some growth over time. Like when it started, I think they were something like 2%, 3% of the hash rate. And then over time they grew up. And then in public numbers, before they announced launching this attack or whatever, they were starting to hit up around I think it was 25, 30% of the hash rate of the network, which is one of the largest pools on it.
So for those of you who can do basic math, 30% is not 51%.
Mm-hmm.
And in walks the controversy around what happened here, because they did this attack. They then stopped and they launched blog posts. They wrote a couple of blog posts, and crypto media picked it up. Blockchain media picked it up and basically said Monero has suffered a 51% attack. And the community went, okay, well, this is blockchain, full transparency. Let's go and look at the numbers. And that's where things started to get a bit sticky for everyone involved, because effectively, let's not forget, their major claim was, we successfully launched a 51% attack. They then had proof that they, calling back to Michael's explanation earlier, of effectively what is, I don't think he used the term, but basically a reorg, where you do some selfish mining and then you basically have a different version of the blockchain that is longer than the chains that are currently in circulation. And then you post that chain back into the network, and you now become your chain becomes the canonical chain. They managed to get 6 blocks ahead of the chain. Now, you need to understand, in terms of time, I think it takes, they've played with the algorithm on Monero. It takes about 10 minutes, I think, someone correct me, or 20 minutes to mine a block. Michael, what is it?
To mine a single block? Oh, I don't know. Yeah, I don't know. It's a
Yeah.
good question.
It takes a
That sounds
specific amount
long,
of time.
but
It is quite long, and it's long on purpose because they have a confirmation process as well. After a block is mined, it requires 10 confirmations from different nodes on the network, I'm assuming, or different miners. So the point is, it takes a long time to get 6 blocks ahead, and it's very highly statistically unlikely that you would just happen to get 6 blocks ahead of the chain. You'd be able to mine because you've got competing miners. Let's not forget, this is a market economy, and so you've got competing miners who have got good amounts of hash rate. They should be able to find blocks just as easily as you can. So you shouldn't be able to get 6 ahead. You can maybe get 1 or 2, but 6 is concerning. And with the 10 confirmation thing, if you get 10 blocks ahead, then you suddenly start to become an authority on the chain. But that's a different story for another day. The point is, they came out and they did a splashy press release. The media picked it up, and then people started to look at the numbers and realize, number one, effectively what happened was there are public websites where you can find out who owns majority or who is responsible for how much hash rate or which mining pools are owned by who, and therefore how much hash rate they have on a given network. Cubic withdrew their numbers like just before the attack started, before they launched the attack, even though they publicized and said, we're going to withdraw our numbers, we're going to have internal dashboards monitoring how hash rate accurately, but no one else outside of our company is going to be able to do that. So that's number one. It kind of got a bit controversial there. Number two, when people do look at the numbers they can find, as Michael kind of said earlier, it looks like they got to like 25, 31%, 30% of the hash rate. They did amass a good amount of hash rate, but not 51% of the network. Then when they talk about the consequences of what they were able to do, I can see you want to jump in, Michael.
That's okay. That's okay. No, you go.
When they talk about the consequences of their so-called 51%, when actually trying to prove, basically exploit the vulnerability being the 51%, the exploit being what we can do to the network. They only posted evidence for the 6-block reorg, i.e. they got 6 blocks ahead and had a longer chain. And then they also publicly announced that they did do a selfish mining attack once they did hit 31%. So people were like, okay, well, that's not 51% attack. So you did something, but it's not a 51% attack. And that's where the controversy lies in this. And so there was a bit of back and forth in the community. It's kind of died down now. Some people are a bit angry. Some people are actually angry more at the media than the actual attackers, which I actually kind of agree with when I think about it, because the media's there to hold people to account. Like, if you say you did this thing, then you're supposed to go and investigate and see if they did the thing.
Yeah.
Kind of like me and Michael doing right now, going and doing our investigation.
There was a lot of media very quickly about it.
There was a lot of media very quickly, which also breaks me personally, and this is where we're going to come off the technical track into the philosophical track. Makes me question the motives of what Cubic were trying to do here, because it seemed like they wanted to get a lot of attention very quickly. And it just I think a bunch of things fell into place, and they realized they could take advantage of an opportunity rather than they sat back and had some galaxy-brained idea to do this thing. But the point is, at the end of the day, was it a 51% attack? From looking at the numbers, from looking at what they were able to achieve, no, it wasn't. Were they able to attack the network? I think so, in my opinion, looking at the evidence, unbalanced evidence, yes, they were, because they got 6 blocks ahead. But were they able to do it with the 51? No. Were they able to do it with the selfish mining? Yes. So they've proven that selfish mining is possible. They've also proven how hard it is, conversely, to do a 51% attack, because these guys were even paying people to come and join their mining pool, and they still didn't get enough hash rate at the end of the day. Apparently, the community did fight back. Cubic has publicized notes about them being DDoSed, their IPs being banned, their node IPs being put on ban lists, and things of that ilk. So it did get a bit sketchy, because you shouldn't be DDoSing anyone. That's illegal, etc., etc. But yeah, at the end of the day, Monero, the long and short of it is, Monero was attacked. It wasn't attacked successfully in the way that the attack is described, but they were able to pull some things off. And so that kind of takes us to the next part. Oh, Michael, sorry, you did say you wanted to add something as well.
Yeah, no, I think you covered most of it. Like, I think, like, it's hard to tell from the public data, right? Like there isn't really, like, when the attack happens, there's a bunch of contrasting forces going on. Like, one is, if you're dedicating hash rate to selfish mining, you're not dedicating it to a publicly visible spot in the dashboarding. So like there's data missing there. Secondly, as you know, since the attack was announced and pre-announced, as hash rate was ramping up, the community was also ramping up hash rate as a defensive mechanism, and so the overall hash rate of the network was greater, and so 50% of that, like that 50% bound, was increasing, right? Like as the attack was going on as well. So yeah, I think I don't know that you can say for certain like what the hash rate they hit was, but I think like I like what they were able to do, like the 6 block reorg, that was the main thing. I think there were subsequent reorgs they did as well. I forget what lengths, but yeah, it like it does not prove that that they reached majority of the hash rate on the network, um, because you can do that with significantly less than 50% if you get lucky in a certain window, right? Like they announced this big window that they're going to do this attack in. If you manage to just out of luck get more than 50% of the blocks within a slice of that window, then you can do a reorg. That's kind of like the theoretical side of it. And yeah, apparently that did happen. And then what does that mean for the network? Like, what's the difference between doing a reorg through a less than 50% selfish mining strategy and doing a reorg through or attaining 50% plus of the network? What are the different consequences of that is kind of interesting. And then, yeah, I think how the community responded, it kicked off a bunch of debates within the Monero community about how to respond, which I think have a lot of security value in them to think about.
Agreed, because well, so the first thing I walked away from this is okay. Well, for our listeners, are all proof of work net chains vulnerable now? In my opinion, no, because it's kind of proven. It's proven out that the attack is possible. It's also proven that the defense is very much possible. And I think in this case, the defense is probably easier than the attack again. And this is something we talk about in our security professions. Is basically you're raising the attack cost at the end of the day. And it was easier to raise the attack cost than it was for them to actually pull off the attack, even when paying people to do so. So there's that discussion around is proof. So no, I think proof of work chains are fine. Second of all, go on, Michael. Sorry.
I was just gonna say, like, it also goes down to like not all proof of work is equal, and different setups of proof of work have different open you up to different attacks. Like one thing that I found kind of interesting was Monero was very explicit about choosing this general purpose CPU bound proof of work to try to avoid hash rate centralization through like ASIC mining, right? But that opened them up to a different kind of attack. Like everything is a trade-off for what kind of threats you're facing. And that opened them up to the threat of somebody with a lot of general purpose CPU hash power and an economic incentive to use it, right?
Yeah,
and
that's such a
what aligned was that, this actor, like the cubic actor, had idle CPU time and they had an economic incentive. And so that it's kind of like the invisible hand of the security market, right? Like that generated the attack basically. So yeah, like you're always trading off what kind of threat you're facing, whatever decision you make.
100%. And when you're engineering anything or a solution to a problem, there's a trade-offs, and there's basically obviously you can have it secure, you can have it quick, you can have it resilient type thing. It's always those types of trade-offs that you need to make, and so I agree with that as well. I guess for the final part of this episode, obviously just being conscious of time, one thing we haven't mentioned, the kind of elephant in the room is, okay then, so proof of work chains are susceptible to this. Someone tried it, wasn't susceptible to it. They actually managed to defend themselves quite robustly. What about proof of stake chains? Now, proof of stake, just for those, for a quick reminder, it's no longer mining it's no longer computing power. It's now actual just raw resources, i.e. how much of that token do you have on that network? And then basically you stake it with a validator who, long and short, they get picked to then mine the next block. That's a bastardized version of how it works, but just for the sake of the argument, that's kind of what it does. Could somebody own more than 51% of the stake? Is kind of the mechanism through which a 51% attack would take place on a proof of stake network. That is an interesting question. Theoretically, again, like 51% computing power, yes, someone could buy up all of those tokens, but as you start to buy up those tokens, you push up the price of the token. So the attack cost changes in real time. and it becomes harder and harder to get yourself over that 51%. Also, with the proof of stake networks that I am aware of, they release more tokens on a schedule, like once a month they will do a token release, and so they will have this schedule in public view for everyone to know for the next 10 years, so they know how much of the supply. I guess you can work it out in your head if you're that quick a mathematician. How much of the supply is going to be released over the next 12 months, etc., etc. But the point is, they raise it automatically. Its natural immunity to this type of thing is raising the token cost as you start to buy and buy and buy and buy, because it becomes very obvious and public for everyone to see. So again, is it theoretically possible on a proof of stake network? Yes. Is it hard? Yes. Could the community react in the same way? Question mark. What do you think, Michael?
Yeah, I think so. One, like, it was suggested at a few places that this as a question, like, should Monero transition to proof of stake as a defensive mechanism? A lot of the community seemed, at least from the vibes of responses, very much against
Is that you
that.
checking Twitter posts, the vibes?
Exactly.
What are the Twitter
You
vibes?
found me out. Was very much against that because of these kind of philosophical decentralization reasons. Like, it seems important to them. Like, one thing that happens in proof of stake sometimes is that, like, the rich get richer sort of thing, right? Like, because I have capital, I stake that capital, I get capital. That's like a loop where where concentration happens, right?
Yeah.
And that is something that it seems like the community very much does not want, the Monero community. And so that suggestion, I think, I don't know, in some places was not well received. In terms of, like, the technical feasibility of an attack like this on a proof of stake network, I think it's, like, significantly harder, especially at the scales, because, like, it's not only that you push the price up as you're buying, it's also that, like, not all tokens are for sale. Like, we conceptualize markets as being infinitely liquid. But if you're talking about owning more than 50% of an asset, they're not. Like you do hit limits with what's for sale and what's not. And so that's another, like, factor in it. So yeah, I think it would be, I don't know, significantly harder. I don't know what I think of the overall question on it, though. Like, I don't have a super settled overall opinion. I think it's probably different consensus mechanisms work different.
Thank you. I was about to say, the reason we neither of us have that super settled because it actually is quite specific, and it comes. One of the things when I first became a security professional, and the answers that people who basically my clients used to hate from myself and our company is whenever they ask the question of, like, are we secure, is the answer is it depends. And it really does depend on the chain. It depends on the chain's objectives, and it depends on how the consensus mechanism is actually constructed, because not all proof of work mechanisms, as we found out in this episode, are built the same. They all have, and they're trading off different things because they have specific objectives they want to hit with theirs. And obviously, Monero prides itself on being decentralized, and it wants to enable that decentralization by staying as democratic as possible for people to actually engage with it. And you do that by making it based on computing power, which you still need money to buy computing power. But the point is, it's more democratic than a proof of stake where I already have capital, as you said, and it becomes a closed loop because I already have capital to deploy to be able to become influential on said network. They obviously do this. Monero's main reason for this is because their main raison d'etre is privacy at all costs.
Yep.
They don't even care about speed. They care about privacy at all costs. I should just note, not that it matters really, but the Monero token hasn't been doing very well recently as a result. Well, I don't even know if it's as a result of this. Apparently, it was on a bit of a downward slide before this attack happened anyway, but it didn't do too well on this as well because obviously they started to suppress the price.
I think there's, like, interesting data you can pull out of, like, how much does the market actually value this kind of attack, sort of.
Yeah.
Right? Like, obviously,
that's
information disputed about whether it was a 50% attack or not. It seems like maybe it wasn't. But yeah, like, it's interesting to have actual data that's like, this is the price impact of double spending being possible, maybe, or some probability of double spending being possible on a network. That's kind of interesting.
I do think also, right, the rise of stablecoins is happening. Anyone who works anywhere close to finance or big tech knows this now. I do think the more light gets shone on how these chains work, because at some point people are like, okay, stablecoins, cool, I can do this to enable certain financial opportunities. Then they're like, oh, let me look at the technology underneath this. And then like, oh, okay. As people pay more attention to these things, I do think there's going to be more scrutiny around these types of stunts. And I call it a stunt because, to me, from my reading of this, we're at the end of the episode, I'm going to say it looked like a publicity marketing stunt, quite frankly, in terms of its intention. I think I don't think it was planned out. I think the opportunity fell in their lap and they realized. I think someone in the office made a joke, we've got all these CPUs lying around, let's mine. And then 2 weeks later, someone went, wait, hold on, we're mining Monero. Let's see if we've got our own token. Let's see if we can do a thing here.
Yeah.
I genuinely think that's just probably how it fell out. And then they just obviously used it to get a signal boost on Cubic itself. Because now we're talking about it. And I'd never heard of them before this.
Yeah.
I definitely heard of
I think
Monero.
the other like interesting aspect of this is like, I remember, you know, yeah, like you said, like it took over the conversation for a while. There was a lot of info about it. There's, you know, oh, we hit this 51% article. And then I remember seeing like I actually remember the first post I saw that was like, I don't think this was a 51%. Like, I think this was just selfish mining at, you know, 30%. The data is not matching up. The dashboard went down, like all that. And I had this realization that like, oh, we're in an information war right now. You know what I mean? Like the another weapon here, along with the hash rate, is the narrative, right? Is the information, and there's movement on both sides of that going on, right?
Information moves markets just as markets move information.
Mm-hmm.
And that's the same thing you see in traditional finance as well. And so anyway, I want to say thank you for those listening. We're going to wrap this one up. That was a cool, calm, collected episode. Please, I suggest if you have even a slight interest in cool cryptography, you go and look up how Monero works, because you can get. I got lost in a rabbit hole on Come One, Come All, and Michael ended up getting lost in a rabbit hole when researching for this, because it is super cool. It is super cool because one of the things you see with these cryptographic white papers is they kind of gather dust and then someone actually builds
something with it later. Yeah, like ring
think.
signatures. Like I learned about those, you know, in university, whatever year cryptography class, and just never thought about them that much after. But then it's
Never
like,
thought
no.
about them.
Yeah, long and short,
really
you
cool.
can make a transaction. You don't know who sent it. You don't know who received it. How does that work? That's the magic. Yeah.
I don't know why I'm giggling, but it's magic. It's absolutely the closest thing to indistinguishable from magic. All right, thank you. We will be back in 2 weeks' time with another episode. Please subscribe, continue to subscribe, and we will come back with another cool episode.